have two answers for that. My ideal client, number one, is someone who's been through a tremendous amount of therapy and it's never worked. And they're coming into me and saying there's a missing piece. Because what I've learned, and I can only say this because I've had a handful of clients that have been therapists that have come to me because even the things that they're trying to utilize that their knowledge of is not really working for them. What I've learned, because I did not know this in my own therapy journey, is that studying trauma and being informed on trauma is not inherently part of a therapist's curriculum, which is like very challenging for me to say, but I've had enough therapists on my podcast to confirm that.
Welcome to Career Coaching Secrets, the podcast where we talk with successful career coaches on how they built their success and the hard lessons they learned along the way. My name is Davis Nguyen, and I'm the founder of Purple Circle, where we help career coaches scale their business to $100,000 years, $100,000 months, and even $100,000 weeks. Before Purple Circle, I've grown several 7- and 8-figure career coaching businesses myself, and have been a consultant at 2 career coaching businesses that are doing over $100 million each. Whether you're an established coach or building your practice for the first time, you'll discover the secrets to elevating your coaching business.
Welcome to Career Coaching Secrets. I'm Kevin, and today we are joined by Stacy Yorrig. She is the founder of Flip Your Mindset, been in business for 5+ years. Welcome to the show, Stacy.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. I'm really curious because we're talking pre-podcast, and you have your own podcast. Even on your LinkedIn, you're saying like trauma care practitioner. And I have a feeling I know what that means, but I would love to hear the origin story, the beginning, the lore. Tell me, how did you get into coaching and turn it into a business?
You know, the coaching, I get asked that question a lot, obviously. And my best answer was truly a whisper. And what I mean by that is I've been kind of a serial entrepreneur. I've owned a lot of businesses. And when I wasn't running my own business, I actually was helping other people kind of turn around their business. And in the last business that I had, which coincidentally was just in network marketing, because I was at home with my kids, I was so successful, and I knew a good part of my success was my ability to coach the people I was working with, and I could see what was holding them back so clearly. And I kept hearing in the back of my head, coaching, and I didn't really even know what that meant. So I kind of put a pause on everything, started researching. And initially, truly, I thought I was going to be like a life coach. Like I was one of those people who in every business I've ever owned, I was that person that people would walk into the office, shut the door, sit down and tell me their deepest, darkest challenges. And somehow I always had this like intuitive wisdom to help pull them through. So I've been doing this informally my entire professional career. So over 30 years. So I thought, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. And I'm just going to monetize it. I'm going to make this into a particular business. And very quickly after I opened my coaching practice, I happened to have a good following on social media. So I had clients right away. I decided to take a leap and get trained in a type of hypnotherapy that had been very powerful in my own healing journey. And while I was in that 1-year training, it became so evidently clear to me that some of my own challenges that I was still riddled with after 30 years of being in different types of modalities of therapy, it's like I had this clearer picture than I'd ever had before, which was trauma. Like, I had all this trauma growing up, but I didn't know I had trauma because I didn't really understand what it was. And as I was in this hypnotherapy training, I realized so much of what people are struggling with is unresolved trauma. It was so clear to me. So as soon as that was done and I got certified in hypnotherapy, I decided to completely change course and put all my coaching efforts into being a trauma care practitioner. So that required many years of training. And I got trained in not just being a trauma care practitioner, but very specific trauma care practices. And so that's all I do is I really just work with people that have unhealed emotional wounds.
And so you mentioned a few different modalities just now. You mentioned hypnotherapy and whatnot as well. Like as a trauma care practitioner, what are some of the modalities that you've kind of gravitated to?
The two that I utilize the most with my clients are known as parts work and polyvagal theory.
Oh, okay. Can you tell me a little bit about them? I'm not familiar with either.
Yeah, of course. Okay. So, have you ever heard yourself say, well, there's a part of me that wants to do this, and there's a part of me that wants to do this, or I really want to do this, but I'm not really being authentic to myself, and I'm going to do this anyway because I feel this pull, or I feel like I'm supposed to do X. The idea behind parts work is that we're kind of what's known as like multimodal, meaning we have a self, like we have that authentic, grounded self where when we do things that we know we're really aligned with, we feel it, we say it. We're like, oh, I feel so much like myself. I feel that feels so aligned to me. But then we know when we're also not doing that. And that's a really good indicator that there's a different part of you, which is not yourself energy, quote unquote, that's kind of at the control panel of your life. So I'm trained in understanding what's known as parts work. It's influenced by a therapeutic model known as internal family systems. And I use that really primarily with my clients because we're all struggling with that. We're all struggling with a lack of inauthenticity. And often it's because we've got these protective layers, which are the parts that are kind of running the show for us. The polyvagal theory part really lines up so well with parts work because polyvagal is really understanding your nervous system. So it really understands all the capabilities that we have, but when our capacity is diminished, so we're not really showing up the way that we want. And when our capacity is diminished, we're not really being self-led. And we're either in what's known as a hyper aroused state. When we're in that state, we use words like agitated, overwhelmed, anxious. We have a lot of different behaviors that come up when we're in this really agitated state. We know that as that fight or flight state. Or you can kind of drop into what's called a hypo-aroused state. And we use language for that, like procrastination. I'm not really motivated. I feel exhausted. I feel lethargic, kind of apathetic. We might call that depressed, and we're kind of in that low state. And so I help my clients understand these different states of being because we're all in it all day, every day, and help them understand it. Because once they understand it, they can say, oh, I'm actually not really aligned with myself right now. I'm either really hyper aroused up here or I'm really dropped down, and teach them how to then baseline and get back kind of rooted back into self, which was honestly the thing that was missing for me in all 30. I was in therapy from the age of 15 to 42 and, on and off. And I struggled with a tremendous amount of anxiety, a tremendous amount. And that was the missing piece for me. I understood logically all of the challenges I had had in my life, but my body was not connected to that. My body was still running as though I should be running from a bear. And when I wasn't running from a bear, I was like playing dead. Basically, I was in that drop, flop, really low mode. Nobody could explain that to me back in the 80s and 90s. That was kind of labeled as a disorder. You were either anxious or you were depressed. But now I understand that it doesn't have to necessarily be that. And when you are labeled with those things, you lose a lot of agency. You're like, well, I guess that's just like my lot in life. But when you understand nervous system science and you understand polyvagal theory, you're like, oh, it makes sense that I'm in this agitated state, or it makes sense that I'm in this lower state. And actually, there's something I can do about it. That's where the agency comes back in. So I'm really very passionate about those two modes, because when I'm educating my clients, it gives them a sense of hope and a sense of agency over their mental state.
That's really interesting. Yeah, as you're describing it, it felt like, I kind of reflected on my career back in the day. I used to be a drug dealer back in the day. I used to be a pharmacist. And so I felt very pulled to do like entrepreneurship, right? But like that whole not self part, the part work, I definitely felt that split between myself. And then
Yeah. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And so a lot of this is just a journey back to self, truly.
Yeah, which kind of reminds me, right? Like I think earlier, you said that you thought you'd be a life coach, right? And so like you kind of dive into this work, and I'm kind of curious, how has, everybody in coaching, they talk about ideal client profiles. And I'm kind of curious about how has the type of clients, the type of people changed over the years? Like who do you help? And yeah, kind of like who have you kind of helped over the years, and how has it transformed?
I have okay. I have two answers for that. My ideal client, number one, is someone who's been through a tremendous amount of therapy and it's never worked. And they're coming into me and saying there's a missing piece. Because what I've learned, and I can only say this because I've had a handful of clients that have been therapists that have come to me because even the things that they're trying to utilize that their knowledge of is not really working for them. What I've learned, because I did not know this in my own therapy journey, is that studying trauma and being informed on trauma is not inherently part of a therapist's curriculum, which is like very challenging for me to say, but I've had enough therapists on my podcast to confirm that. And so a lot of the things I just talked about, they're not privy to that. They don't learn nervous system science that way. And so, a lot of people come to me because they're doing a lot of top level, kind of like very heady, very thought based therapy where it all has to do with thinking and changing your thoughts, but it's not getting into here. So somebody that's coming to me that's like, nothing's worked. Or sometimes people come to me and they've never been in therapy, but they've seen me on social media, they've seen me give talks, or more likely they've had somebody that they know that's having a lot more peace in their life, and that person had worked with me. And so they're coming to me based on referral. But ultimately, all of them have something unresolved that's holding them back from being in that self. When we are rooted in self and we're kind of aligned and in flow and really like living life from the seat of who we really are, you're in good shape. So most people are coming to me because they're what I will call more parts-led than self-led. And it's leading to a lot of discomfort. So they're either burning out, which is usually the byproduct, or, they're just walking from a place of complete anxiety all the time, or they feel like they have to control every outcome, or they're super people pleasers, or, they never know how to set a boundary. They don't even know what that is. And so they're just not really living a life that feels fully aligned to who they are. They're exhausted. And all of that hustle is exhausting. And, people will come to me feeling like they need something different.
You said something really interesting earlier. I do want to go back to that therapy piece because you said that there was something missing. And I guess through my experience, right? Like when I was in therapy, it felt like I was kind of revisiting things, but coaching's more like looking toward the future, right? And more toward change, I guess. That's my perspective. But what do you feel like the missing piece of therapy is?
So, and again, I purposefully have had a lot of therapists on my podcast over the years because most people are just going to go to a therapist when they're having mental health issues or they're feeling, however they're feeling in life where they don't feel aligned. And they might do that because it's insurance, or they might do that because that's kind of like the traditional path. One of the things that I've been able to get them to talk about a lot is that when you're trained as a therapist, there's kind of this sense, and I think it's starting to change actually, but especially people who were trained in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, there is this sense of I'm on this side and you're on that side. And I'm going to listen to all of your challenges, but I am not to share with you what's going on in my life. And I'm certainly not sharing with you that I actually have a similar challenge. I'm the expert as the mental health professional. And you're just here to tell me what the problem is, and I'm supposed to give you my expert advice or guidance. In coaching, it's much more peer-to-peer. right? You're more sitting right next to the person. If somebody says to me, if I'm struggling with that, it's really easy for me to say, I've had that same struggle, and give them a little bit of a vignette of a way that I can relate to their challenge. That is really not the traditional therapy model. And I remember the first time I ever worked with a coach and she shared something personal with me. And in my head, I was like, oh my God, is she supposed to be doing that? Like, is she allowed? Because I'd been in therapy for 30 years and I'd never been able to get that connection. And here's the thing, when it comes to trauma, healing happens in connection. Healing happens when you feel safe enough to show up. And so when you can create that connection by sharing common challenges, which we all have because we're human, that's huge. Number two, in coaching, the client is the expert, not me. I'm not the expert on you. I can just see how you're not able to access you, and I can be able to guide you back on how to do that. But you are actually the expert of yourself, not me. And so I think that that's a really big difference as well. So to me personally, and this is just my own point of view, it's a much more collaborative process when you're working with a coach. And what I see a lot now is a lot of therapists actually also becoming coaches, and they're kind of like straddling both sides for a variety of reasons. And then of course, the last is there's no territorial restriction for me. I can work with anybody anywhere in the world, and I do. Whereas, therapists have a little bit more of a limited geography that they can work through. So it's not uncommon for somebody to say, oh my God, my client just moved to Mexico, or my client just moved to Iowa. I can't service her. Could you? I'm like, sure. And then they'll make the introduction. So that's hard because then you get that break in continuity too, which kind of stinks.
It's really, thanks for clarifying that too. Like, I'm always very curious on people's like perspective on that, right? The difference between coaching and therapy and stuff. The other thing I want to ask you too is, like, you mentioned two things, right? A lot of the clients that you have come through referral. You mentioned when you first started your coaching practice, you mentioned you had a social media following. But like, if we were fast forward today, how do people typically find you? I guess, like, what are different methodologies that you're using for your marketing?
I'm very blessed. I am a serial entrepreneur at heart. And so I think that that's actually a very, very unique skill set to be a businesswoman and also be on the mental health side. And so I really do leverage social media. I leverage YouTube. And I do get business through that because I'm building a connection. So I use those platforms solely as psychoeducation. So I get a lot of referrals through that where people will say, I saw your reel, or I've been following you, or more times than not, I'll get my sister sent me your reel, so things get shared that way. Even though I might not have like the biggest, greatest following, it still works. And then also my podcast, either being like this, like a guest on someone's podcast, or my own podcast, it's getting found more and more. I've had that podcast now for 4 or 5 years. And so I just think, look, anybody that's in business, right? And this is my business head speaking. When we start a business, we're like farmers. We buy a plot of land and we're like, this is great. I want to grow kale, and you prep the land and then you plant all these seeds, and like a very small percentage of them are going to take. But the ones that take maybe will propagate, and then the next year you're going to have bigger and then bigger and then bigger. And the business is the same way. The first 2 years, you're literally just finding the plot of land, tilling the soil, prepping the soil, planting the seeds. Some of it grows, some of it doesn't. Then what grows gives you more growth. And so, around that 5-6 mark, you're kind of like in a flow. What works, what doesn't work. And at that point, you have enough of a momentum where the referral is really, whether it's coming from social media and YouTube or it's coming from actual clients. And then, of course, I'm also on the speaking circuit. So I go around and I give a lot of talks. I do a lot of psychoeducation, a lot of workshops, a lot of breakout sections on things like burnout and anxiety. And because these are topics that people are really struggling with, Again, it's either they saw it themselves and they're curious, or they heard somebody that was in that room and said, hey, maybe you should check her out. But it's a process, it's work. You have to really put in the work. It's a whole other set of activities outside of coaching to build that.
Yeah, I think people tend to forget about that because as a coaching business, you have to do the business
a lot of
development
work.
part as well. So, yeah.
It's a lot of work.
This leads me to my next question because when you're talking about things like anxiety, burnout, or even things like trauma, right? It's pretty intimate stuff that you're talking about with your clients, right? And so I guess how do you manage your current capacity, or how have you thought about it? Do you hire other coaches? Do you cap the amount of clients that you work with? What are your thoughts on that?
I cap how many people I see a day for sure, because I never know what I'm going to hear. And if I'm doing a day where I'm doing hypnosis, so my hypnotherapy sessions are 2 hours, I'll never have more than 2 non-hypnosis clients that day. So on that day, it would be a max of 3, because that's easily a 2 to 2.5 hour session. And I know it's going to be heavy. So I will go light on those days. So I modulate. And as soon as I can see where a particular day is, as far as clients, I'll just block the day out. So I'm very, very mindful of that. And I think, it kind of gets overused, this term self-care, but it's really so crucial, especially if you're in mental health coaching, where you are doing something to take care of yourself. So all mental health practitioners, no matter whether coach or not, should have their own person. Thank God I've done 30 years of work on myself, so I don't need the level of consistency of working with someone one-on-one that I used to need, but I for sure have somebody on speed dial, whether something's feeling heavy with a client or I have something else going on in my own life. And it's just really about the balance. I used to work in my 20s and 30s, I would work myself to the ground and my capacity would be very narrow. Now, and I'm going to be 54 next month, that's a non-negotiable. I just won't do it. So if before I would finish my day at 6 and then come home and put in a couple of more hours, it was the hustle. Now I'm like, it's not happening because I'll burn out. I've had 2 nervous breakdowns. I'm like, I've learned my lesson after the second one. I'm like, I know what my limit is and you have to learn it.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, learning the right boundaries to set in your business, because if you burn out, then who the heck is going to take care of your clients?
Forget it.
Right? Like you're done,
Right.
So yeah.
I got to stay healthy and I have to stay mentally ready to go.
Which leads me to my next question too. I'm also, since you've had, quite an extensive business background as well, right? I'm kind of curious on this end as well. So something I've noticed is a lot of coaches, they struggle with things like pricing or pricing strategy. And of course, you don't have to give any hard numbers, but how do you think about structuring your pricing? Because I know some people do packages, some people do value-based, some people do projects. And then I've also seen models where people align themselves kind of like a consulting firm or like an attorney's office or a therapist practice. Yeah,
like a retainer.
Different people have kind of gravitated to certain things. So I'm kind of curious, what have you gravitated to?
Yeah. So it's really funny you should say that, because one of the things I love about the place where I was trained is we have to do something known as supervision, which is very typical and actually more of a therapy space. You do not normally get that in coaching, but because we're so serious about the mental health coaching, because it is trauma care, the people who own the school that I was trained with, they're all therapists. So turned coaches. So they kind of take that therapy model. So sometimes when we're in supervision, we talk about not just a case, but building businesses. And because I do have business acumen, I tend to be somebody that a lot of people in the group will go to. They have not learned this art. So they're all just sure, do a session with me. And then if you like it, come back. And I don't play that game. Number one, I'm doing trauma care. I will give you a 75-minute consult up front. And my 75-minute consult used to be free. And a few years ago, I charged $75 for it, which I think is very, very reasonable. And in that scenario, you're getting an opportunity to feel like what a session feels like. You're sharing with me what's going on, where you're struggling, why you might want to be working with me, and then I can share you insight, and you're getting a feel for exactly how I work. So if at that point you're like, I feel connected, then it's a package. And it's a package for a few reasons. Number one, this work does not get done in one session. So that's a commitment. Like, I need to know you're committed to the process, right? Because I'm committed to the process for you. So I'll offer something really small, like a 4-pack, just to get the person off the ground, get them comfortable, get them, maybe that's their best price point, whatever, but I give them that small package. But most people will buy a package of 8 or 12. And, if you buy 8, there's a discount. If you buy 12, there's a deeper discount. But I've done that from the get. And if you want a one-off with me, you have to have had a package with me first. Okay. The other reason why I do that is because I am not an accountant. I'm not a bookkeeper. I'm not interested I don't have, this. If we're building businesses and we're building referrals and we're building social media channels, we don't have the extra time to then be bookkeeping. I don't want to be chasing people for money. So it's just not what I want to do. So you're either buying a package of 4, 8, or 12. You're either paying fully up front and getting the best price, or you can pay over time, right? And that's all set up in my system, and it gets done through Stripe and all the jazz. And then they're going. And then we're in a committed situation where we're looking to do this work. And I'm sure there are some people that don't work with me because of that, but I have plenty of people that will work with me. And I think that they actually appreciate it because now they're creating some consistency and some curiosity about where it's going to go. So I give them that kind of taste at a lower level. So those are 75 minutes, and I'm an open book. If you're buying a bundle of 4, you're paying $175 a session. Now I'm saying this in November of 2025. I don't know where it's going to be in 2026. So whoever listens to this in 2026, it might be different. But traditionally, I charge $175 for a session of 4. And then if you buy 8, there's a discount. If you buy 12, there's a discount. But it seems to really work well for people. And it kind of gets us into a committed connection because that's really what we're looking for. And different from therapy, I kind of like this too. When your package is done, you get to choose. Do you want to take a beat? Do you feel like you're in a really good place and you want to kind of fly without, with your own parachute now, and then come back to me for a one-off or come back to me for another package at another time? I love that. In therapy, we get stuck. We're afraid to break the relationship sometimes, right? Especially if we're dealing with somebody that's a people pleaser. So then they get stuck in this loop. Whereas for me, I'm giving you an out almost. I'm like, let's see where you feel at 8. Let's see where you feel at 12. And a lot of people will either want to re-up because they love it, or they'll say, I feel so good. Can we just take a season off and just see where it goes? And I'm like, yeah, I just had somebody email me today. I haven't seen her in a year. She's like, I want to come back. Great, let's do it. And I love that fluidity, and they like that fluidity because then they don't feel so locked in. People have a hard time breaking up with their therapist. And I hear that a lot. So I'm giving them the opportunity to make a choice on their own. And there's no right or wrong. And I tell them that from the get. Hey, this is the last session of the package. You do what feels right for you. I'm always here. And it can flow, either way. And I love that for them.
Yeah, I have another, before we move on to the next question, I just want to comment that, I think you're touching upon something very important where one of the requirements for coaching to work that I've seen through all these different podcasts I've done is that there has to be an intrinsic desire to want coaching. You can't force someone to want, yeah. And so by giving that person a way out, right? That's so genius, and it makes a relationship better and probably prevents a resentful relationship further down the line where
I think so. And it gives them the time to reflect. Where am I today based on compared to where I was when I came in? Do I feel better? Do I not? This is an agency process. I'm trying to get you more agency. If you're self-led, you should have the confidence and courage to say, I want to stop. That's fantastic. Like, especially if I have somebody coming in that's been an extreme people pleaser that maybe worried about upsetting me. You're not going to upset me. This is your option. You get the choice. And so it's kind of like a nice little baseline test for them to say, if I use my voice here and I say I want to stop, is that okay? Am I going to be safe in that? And I love that little opportunity for them. I think it's fantastic.
Another question for you. I want to get to know you and your ambitions a little bit more because, like I said, you've been in business for a while, but this specific business, you're coming up like 5 years, right? And so as you think about this business, where do you want this coaching business to take you in the next few years? Do you have like desires to scale, hire more people, more coaches, or do you have any secret dreams that no one knows about?
Yeah. So, obviously, like in the coaching space, we talk about all of this a lot. Like, how do you scale? And there's a couple of things that happen here. Number one, because I'm in the trauma space, and I do not believe that mental health support is as easily accessed as it should be. I'm not somebody that would ever be interested. I'm going to put in quotes a high ticket sales model because that is not what is in the best interest of my client, right? I'm not in like an executive coaching situation where there's this like ROI where you're like making more money because I've taught you how to get, a higher salary. Like it's a very, very different model. So I don't like that model. It feels like a complete ick to me for what I do in my space. My space is much more therapeutic. So what I've done is I've created tiers, right? So my podcast, the whole reason for my podcast is a zero cost entry level access to information that is in my brain. When I went through my second nervous breakdown, I had no finances to get mental health support, and there were not podcasts, and YouTube did not exist, and TikTok and Instagram did not exist. Like access to all this free information was out. So I could only read. That's all I could do. So the podcast and Instagram and YouTube are my no cost entry point to free mental health support information. Then I want to have like a low cost, right? So I'm in the process of finishing a book. The book will come out likely at the beginning of January. That's obviously a very low cost, but will give you some insight into tools like parts work and polyvagal theory that you may have not been exposed to before. The next mid-level tier is something that I just launched in October, which will be running every quarter. It's called the Calm Code. It's a live online 8-week course that people can take. There's only 8 people in a cohort, so it's 8 weeks for the same 8 people. So you're building that safe net. And the whole course is trying to understand anxiety from a different perspective and actually be able to befriend it and have a relationship with the part of you that is creating anxiety inside your system, or the parts of you. And then I have my coaching, right? So now we're getting into my higher ticket point. And of course, over time, as a businesswoman, as the courses take off, I will likely raise my rates on my one-to-one because you can access my knowledge through the course in a group setting. And then my one-to-one knowledge will be a little bit more exclusive. So that's why I was saying before, as of now, this is what my pricing is. I don't know what it will be in a year. And then I'm also part of the National Speakers Association. So now this is where we're growing out that one-to-many access on a bigger scale, where I can be paid as a speaker in either breakouts or in keynotes. And that's as a business owner, how I see my business scaling, where you have these different income streams, right? Speaking, the course, coaching, the book. And each one comes at a different price point to the end user, so they have access at different price points. I just think that that is so incredibly important in the space of mental health. And it's a driving force for me. I need to make sure that people have access to this knowledge at different entry points, even if it's zero. And that's the podcast and the Instagram and the YouTube.
Yeah, as you're creating these different tiers or you're moving toward this like vision in your mind, I'm also kind of curious too, what are some I don't know how we want to label them. Maybe some growing pains that you're noticing in your business right now. Anything unexpected?
I mean, I'm one person. I mean, I think that that's the growing pain, right? Like, I do have a great support person that's been working with me for 3 years now. And he does all of the marketing piece. Like, I generate all the content. If you go into my Instagram, you're going to see me. I create reels like it's another job. And I spend a lot of time just chunking out hours of a week and just like pre-recording a tremendous amount of content. But then I kind of put it in the cloud and he cuts it up and sets it up. So I don't have to worry about that part. He also manages and produces all of the podcasts and edits, makes all the reels, gets into YouTube, gets it into the different podcast platforms. So I don't have to do that. But other than that, everything else is me. The coaching is me. The course curriculum is me. The finding students is me. So that's the growing pain. And I'm not really interested in bringing in other coaches because people are coming to me because of my unique way of simplifying very complex concepts. And they're looking to work with me, and I'm happy with that. So the growing pain over time will be more of the back office support. Like, do I get a VA? Do I have somebody helping me with follow-ups to leads? That kind of stuff. But I'm not looking to grow a coaching practice where there's many coaches. That's not what I'm interested in. I want people to be able to come to me because of the unique way that I've created these therapeutic models and these concepts to work together that only I do.
Last question for you, because we were talking about potential VAs and like growing the support team, right? This is a section, it's actually new. I'm going to play it with you today. It's a little game. And so well, not a game, a segment. So it's called Overrated and Underrated. And as a business owner, I'm pretty sure that you've and I want to do it through the lens of business investments because as a business owner, you probably invested, or we probably invested into things like our own training, like marketing, team members, masterminds. There's so many different things that we can invest in. But I'm curious, what's the most overrated business investment you made and what's the most under?
I'm trying to think of I'm looking at my spreadsheet in my mind and thinking of every single expense line. I can tell you certain systems I've bought into that have been overrated, but I don't want to call anybody out, honestly. But I've invested in some systems that promoted that they could do certain things and they just could not deliver. And so to me, that's overrated, right? That was you just have to cut the loss and say this investment was a bad investment. I think underrated is probably podcast support. I just see too many people doing what I'm doing that don't have the support, and it's taking up way too much of their time. You're allowed to say, especially in your 50s, which I am in, I could do it all. I'm very creative. I could cut up all the stuff. I can do it all. I don't want to do it. I want to put my efforts where I know my zone of genius is. So I think what's underrated is actually bringing on somebody and giving up. I think this is also very underrated, giving up control. You got to give up some control to grow. If you were controlling every single item, you're going to be much slower. So I think my answer for that was underrated is giving up control and building a relationship with somebody that you trust that can do it. And here's the key, Kevin, good enough, right? So it's going to get done good enough, well enough versus me doing it and being burnt out because I don't have the time and maybe it would be done differently, but I'm going to do a lot less of it as well. So in order to grow and move quickly, you have to give up some control and you have to just allow somebody else to do it and allow for mistakes and allow for mishaps and be able to grow from it as a group. But that's underrated. People don't like to give up the control.
Yeah, I follow a lot of Dan Martell sometimes, and he says 80% is 80% done by someone else is better than 100% done by yourself.
I say it all the time. And so people are like, well, is it perfect? I'm like, I'm not a perfectionist. It's good enough. And I know it's good enough because people are contacting me on social media saying this really hit. This really landed. You just spoke to me. This has been my problem. Or on TikTok, I get a lot of that. or on YouTube too, actually, when people are making comments. That stuff would not get up there if I did not release control. It just wouldn't.
And there's also like the parts thing too, right? Like, because the parts work that you're talking about before, especially with myself, because I'm on YouTube, I'm on a lot of social media stuff too, right? And there was a point when I started hiring a lot of my team, my social media managers, my different editors that I have for the YouTube and whatnot, my thumbnail designers. And I was really torn. And the narrative inside my head was just like, well, I could do it myself. But like, I was tying my identity to working really, really hard. And a good coach actually told me, like, well, Kevin, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. I'm like, that's a good
That's my point.
you know?
Yeah.
So.
And like, look, in my 20s and 30s, I was like, why would I have somebody else do it when I can do it the way I want it done, right? Like, I have the vision, and I can do it. I have the capability. Then you get into your 40s and 50s, and I think the question changes. It's, I can do it all. What do I like to do, and where do I want to maximize using my time? And that's where you're giving up a little bit of the control. And for some people, that's really uncomfortable. And then we get to investigate that part of you that is so controlling to understand why it makes you feel better to be in control of everything versus allowing someone else to do it.
Yeah. And just one last point, that next evolution of that I hit pretty recently, I would say, not super recently, but like within the last year, is like when I started offloading the stuff that I hated, right? And to someone who really loves that work, and being able to pay them something that they love that actually solved my problem, I'm like, wow, this becomes actually really, really addicting. And how do I find more who's and stuff and just incorporate them into ecosystem? So it's definitely a game changer right there. So long story short, I agree with your podcast support, your backend support for social media and all that.
Oh my God, yes. We can do it. You and I are bright. We can do it. But it's like, do we want to do it? And why not give it to somebody? Well, it's all that they do. So honestly, especially in today's market where like the algorithms are changing like all the time, like you would have to make it your full-time job to stay on top of what's getting viewed, what's not getting viewed, what's the right algorithm, what's the right method, what's the right platform. Like that in and of itself is a job. Why not give it to the person that's spending all their time doing it, not just for you, but for other people as well? And they're making it their job to know all of that well before you would know it.
Last thing too, I've noticed, because I've been very fortunate to have like people like Ali Abdal, like who was my client and stuff like that. Seeing him grow his brand and knowing other people in the space too, I'm just like, none of them doing it alone. You think like Daniel Priestley or Dan Martello or any of these other people like are doing cuts in freaking Final Cut? I don't think so, right? So, yeah. Last question for you: how can people find you and connect with you, Stacey?
Yeah, a great place to go is my Instagram if they're on social media, and I make it very simple. It's just my name. So it's Stacey, and my last name is Uhrig, Uhrig. So that's a great place. People DM me all the time. I'm constantly in my DMs. I will always reply, and it will always be me replying. And then my website, which is flipyourmindset.com. And everything I do, I'm very, very transparent. They can see everything that I do, how I work, why I do what I do. And then they can always contact me through my website as well.
You know, there's so many different takeaways I had from this podcast too. One, I thought your evolution of discovering the two modalities that you're talking about, polyvagal theory and parts work, was really interesting. Starting from a life coach to like over here. I also loved your packages and how you kind of have like a love it or leave it type of policy, you know, and how it improves the relationships between your clients. And then I loved your investment answer as well with the podcast support. That's my long-winded answer of saying, hey, like, I appreciate the work that you do. Your work matters, and thank you so much for generously sharing your experience and wisdom on this podcast. So thank you so much, Stacey.
I'm always grateful for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
That's it for this episode of Career Coaching Secrets. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this episode to catch future episodes. This podcast was brought to you by Purple Circle, where we help career coaches scale their business to $100,000 years, $100,000 months, or even $100,000 weeks, all without burning out and making sure that you're making the impact and having the life that you want. To learn more about our community and how we can help you, visit joinpurplecircle.com.